This video will give you a brief tour of the fallopian tube, or also referred to correctly as the oviduct. And here in this specimen we have annotated it to show you that this is the ovary here, and the oviduct is very close to the ovary, and the fimbriated end, which this is, the end of the oviduct has these long finger-like projections of the mucosa that really pretty much envelop and close by the ovary to catch an egg when it's ovulated. And so the oviduct is a tubular structure for the most part, but expands at the end, as I just said, in the fimbriated end. This is a cross-section through the most narrow portion of the oviduct. So I refer you back to the lecture so you can see the whole picture. But let's just take a look at the epithelium in the oviduct in the most narrow portion that is known as the isthmus. So just before we go and look at the epithelium, on the outside of the isthmus of the oviduct are simple squamous cells, and this is the serosa with some connective tissue underneath it. But those are simple squamous epithelial cells, and they form the a mesothelium, which is part of the peritoneum. And within that you've got a layer of smooth muscle cells that are cut that are running longitudinal, another layer that's circular, so you see longitudinal sections through smooth muscle cells. And if we move in now, we'll see that you've got connective tissue that forms sort of like a lamina propria of these finger-like projections of the mucosa that goes into the lumen where the sperm would be traveling. And it's not really possible to distinguish the two types. Almost all of these cells that I'm looking at here appear to have cilia on them. There are some cells here, if I enlarge, that look fairly smooth, but this may be due to the plane of section. If we say look at this area right here and enlarge this, the projections here are mostly cilia. So at least in the lab specimen identification, we won't require you to distinguish between the PEG cells and the ciliated cells, just to know about them from the lecture. So that's a cross-section of the isthmus, and here you have some blood vessels and connective tissue that are supporting the tube. And by the way, in the lecture we refer to the oviduct as a uterine tube, so it actually has three different type of names: uterine tube, oviduct, and fallopian tube. Next to the ovary you have the fimbriated, and all of this is just folds of the mucosa with underlying connective tissue. And here you can see the ciliated cells. They're not very well at this magnification, but you see these projections, and those are cilia. Okay, so and then going over to the ovary, interesting ovary here because it's from a fairly young individual, and you can see the primordial follicles here that have just flat layers of cells around it. And then probably if you look around you'll be able to see some more mature follicles, maybe beginning over here. So this would be a secondary follicle with two layers of cells around the oocyte, and if the oocyte's been sectioned just off center, and now you can see the nuclei of oocytes over here, and this is a secondary follicle. I see the beginning of a primary follicle. You see that you have one single layer of follicular cells around this that are not flat, so that's the very beginning of a primary follicle, and the rest of these are primordial. And so that concludes the fallopian tube and a peek at this ovary. We're going to have another specimen that will be more extensive on the ovary.